Sergey Viktorovich Lavrov is a Russian diplomat and currently the Foreign Minister of Russia, incumbent since 2004. His nomination to the Foreign Minister's office was approved by two Russian presidents, in 2008 by Dmitry Medvedev and in 2012 by Vladimir Putin. Prior to that, Lavrov was a Soviet diplomat and Russia's ambassador to the United Nations from 1994 to 2004. Besides his native Russian, Lavrov speaks English, French, Sinhala and Dhivehi. Early life and education: Lavrov was born in Moscow on March 21, 1950 to an Armenian father and a Russian mother from Georgia. His mother worked in the Soviet Ministry for Foreign Trade. Lavrov graduated from high school with a silver medal. Since his favorite class was physics, he planned to enter either the National Research Nuclear University or the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, but he entered the Moscow State Institute of International Relations and graduated in 1972. During his education at the MGIMO, Lavrov studied international relations. Soon he learned Sinhalese, then the only official language of Sri Lanka, as well as Dhivehi, the official language of the Maldives. Moreover, Lavrov learned English and French, but has stated that he is unable to speak the French language fluently. After he was admitted to the university, Lavrov, along with other students, was sent for a month to build the Ostankino Tower. During his summer vacations, Lavrov also worked in Khakassia, Tuva and the Russian Far East. Each semester Lavrov with his fellow students conducted drama performances, which were later presented on the main stage of the university. During the third year of his studies, Lavrov married. Career Soviet Union Diplomatic career in Sri Lanka: Lavrov graduated in 1972. As per the rules of that time, a graduate of the Moscow State Institute of International Relations had to work for the Foreign Ministry for a certain amount of time. Lavrov was employed in the Soviet Embassy in Sri Lanka as an advisor, as he was already a specialist on the country. At the time, the Soviet Union and Sri Lanka had close market and economic cooperation, and the Soviet Union launched the production of natural rubber in the country. The Soviet Embassy in Sri Lanka also maintained relations with the Maldives. The embassy in Sri Lanka employed only 24 diplomats. Lavrov was given the task of continuously analyzing the situation in the country, but he also worked as a translator, personal secretary and assistant for Rafik Nishanov. In addition, he gained the diplomatic rank of an attaché copyright section of the International Economic Relations and the UN. In 1976 Lavrov returned to Moscow. He worked as a third and second secretary in the section for the International Economic Relations of the USSR. There he was involved in analytics, and his office also worked with various international organizations including the United Nations. In 1981, he was sent as a senior advisor to the Soviet mission at the United Nations in New York City. In 1988 Lavrov returned to Moscow and was named deputy chief of the section of the International Economic Relations of the USSR. Between 1990 and 1992 he worked as director of the International Organization of the Soviet Foreign Ministry. Russian Federation In October 1990, Andrei Kozyrev, who led the control of the international organizations at the time, was named Foreign Minister of the Russian SFSR. In that year, the powers of the Soviet Foreign Ministry and the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic were distributed. Until then the Russian SFSR had only a ceremonial role. In October 1991, the foreign ministers of all Soviet republics, except Georgia and the Baltic states, held a meeting where they dealt with the Union of Foreign Ministries. In November 1990, the State Council decided to change its name from the Union of Foreign Ministries to the Foreign Ministry of the Soviet Union, and in December that year, the Foreign Ministry of Soviet Russia became the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Federation. In 1992 Lavrov was named Director of the Department for International Organizations and Global Issues in the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Federation. In April 1991, he was named Deputy Foreign Minister. Lavrov was asked to oversee the activities of the Human Rights and International Cultural Cooperation and the two departments for the CIS countries, international organizations and international economic cooperation. Lavrov worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs until 1994 when he returned to work in the United Nations, this time as the permanent representative of Russia. While in the latter position, he was the president of the United Nations Security Council in December 1995, June 1997, July 1998, October 1999, December 2000, April 2002, and June 2003. Foreign Ministership. On March 9, 2004, President Vladimir Putin appointed Lavrov to the post of Minister of Foreign Affairs. He succeeded Igor Ivanov in the post. On May 21, 2012, Lavrov was reappointed Foreign Minister to the cabinet led by Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. Lavrov is regarded as continuing in the style of his predecessor, a brilliant diplomat but a civil servant rather than a politician. A Russian foreign policy expert at London's Chatham House has described him as a tough, reliable, extremely sophisticated negotiator, but adds that he's not part of Putin's inner sanctum, and that the toughening of Russian foreign policy has got very little to do with him. 2012 Support of Bashar al-Assad. In 2012, a Russian delegation traveled to Syria to affirm Russia's backing of the Syrian government. Lavrov and Mikhail Frykov, who were part of the delegation, were given a royal welcome by thousands of pro-Assad supporters. The supporters waved Russian flags in thanks to Russia's veto of a UN resolution calling for tough sanctions on the Syrian government. 2014 Crisis in Ukraine. After the March 2014 referendum of Crimea to Russia and after the United Nations General Assembly vote had declared the results, on March 29 Lavrov was interviewed over the crisis in Ukraine. Here he proposed that Ukraine be independent of any bloc, the Russian language be recognized officially, and that the constitution be organized along federal lines, amongst other things. Lavrov noticed William Hague's newspaper article which described the initial sanctions regime in response to Russia's outrageous land grab, bullying, and which left them facing global isolation. Lavrov reminded readers that the zero-sum, either-or bloc politics of Ukraine were first suggested in 2004 by Karel de Gucht, then Foreign Minister of Belgium. While visiting Kiev, Ukraine on March 22, Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper stated that he supports expelling Russia from the G8 and expects to discuss the potential expulsion with other G7 leaders at an upcoming meeting in The Hague. On March 24, G8 leaders met formally in The Hague, without Russia being present, and voted to officially suspend Russia's membership in the G8. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov stated earlier that day that the G8 was an informal organization and membership was optional for Russia. Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, as host of the then next G20 meeting, proposed on March 19, 2014 to ban Russia over its role in the 2014 Crimean crisis. She was reminded on March 24 by a communiqué of the BRICS foreign ministers, of whom Lavrov is one, that the ministers noted with concern the recent media statement on the forthcoming G20 summit to be held in Brisbane in November 2014. The custodianship of the G20 belongs to all member states equally and no one member state can unilaterally determine its nature and character. Lavrov was interviewed again on March 30. He described the meeting at the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague earlier that week. His NSS position was consistent with the one in his March 29 interview, in which he spoke of the February 21 agreement he signed along with Viktor Yanukovych, Vitaly Klitschko, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, and Oleg Tsianbuk as well as the foreign ministers of Poland, France and Germany to promote peaceful changes in Ukrainian power. Lavrov stressed federalism as a solution to the constitutional impasse in the Ukraine, and deplored the disoficialization of the Russian language. He noticed the work of the Secretariat of the Council of Europe at the Venice Commission to prevent a legitimation of the Crimean referendum, and to expel Russia. Lavrov was taken aback by what the U.S. President Barack Obama said about Russia being a regional power and about the costs they will have to pay. He claimed that hardball tactics were used by the U.S. at the UN to declare invalid the Crimean referendum. Lavrov deplored the misuse of the Schengen Agreement to force Crimeans to visit Kiev in order to gain a Schengen visa, and noticed that the EU proposes a visa-free regime for Ukrainian citizens. The Russians surveilled the contacts of EU ambassadors with the Svoboda Party and claimed that the Ukrainians appeared to be in violation of the ICAO agreement on respite of pilots. Lavrov was quoted as saying Euro unregistered trademark I'm not so much surprised by the pettiness of those who have seized power in Ukraine. But the pettiness of their Western sponsors is amazing. Lavrov reiterated the three-part Russian proposal for the progress of Ukraine: constitutional federalism, recognition of linguistic minorities, that Ukraine be a non-aligned state. His subordinate in London, Ambassador Alexander Yakovenko, had on March 28 authored a piece in the Daily Telegraph which largely repeats the Russian three-point plan. Yakovenko remarked that the United States, United Kingdom, and Germany each have federalized systems, and suggests that Russian along with Ukrainian should be given an official language status while other languages will be granted a status in accordance with the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. The Kiev government on March 30 announced Lavrov's proposals as amounting to a Euro-OEV complete capitulation of Ukraine, its dismemberment, and the destruction of Ukrainian statehood, a Euro unregistered trademark as proposals for federalization, a second official language, and referendums are viewed in Ukraine as nothing less than proof of Russia Euro unregistered trademark as aggression. We sincerely regret that Minister S. Lavrov had to voice them, a Euro said Foreign Minister Andrea Deshkaitsia in a statement. This position was repeated forcefully on April 10 in London's Daily Telegraph by Ambassador Volodymyr Kondorgyai. Kondorgyai asserted that Ukraine always was a Euro, and, a Euro unregistered trademark convinced, will be a Euro a unitary state. Kiev has unambiguously urged Moscow to avoid meddling in Ukraine Euro unregistered trademark internal affairs. Instead, the Russians offer an idea of federalization aimed at destroying Ukraine, and concludes with an unfortunate biblical reference to Matthew 7. In a significant breakthrough toward the peaceful resolution of this conflict, the Prime Minister of the Ukraine, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, on April 11 offered concessions to rebels in the city of Donetsk, thus addressing point number 1 of the Lavrov proposal as follows. He told regional leaders and businessmen there that Parliament should consider a Euro law on referendums a Euro to allow regions to decide issues of key importance to them. Executive committees of each region will be handed all financial, economic, administrative and other powers so they control their own territories, giving them the ability to develop these territories to attract investment and receive additional income for each region by amending the budget law of Ukraine. The central government is ready not only for dialogue with the regions, but to meet legal demands and wishes of every resident of the country. Lavrov denied accusations that Russia is arming the pro-Russian separatists. There are reasons to believe that they hear us on other aspects of Russian position regarding the crisis in Ukraine, but that doesn't mean that they immediately move to heed our calls. Lavrov said the separatists want to defend their culture, their traditions, celebrate their holidays rather than anniversaries of Roman Shukvik and Stepan Bandera. Personal life: he is a keen sportsman and a smoker. Lavrov likes to watch football games on television, is an ardent fan of the Moscow club Spartak, and a keen amateur footballer in his own right. He has one daughter, Ekaterina, a graduate of Columbia University, who stayed in New York until 2014, when she was asked to come back to live in Moscow. Honors and awards. He is an honorary member of the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society. Order of Sergius of Radonezh First Class, for his political efforts that have benefited the Russian Orthodox Church. Order of Merit for the Fatherland, First Class, Second Class, Third Class and Fourth Class. Order of Honor, Honored Worker of the Diplomatic Service of the Russian Federation. Order of the Holy Prince Daniel of Moscow, First Class and Second Class. Order of Friendship, Grand Cross of the Order of the Sun, Order of Friendship of Peoples, Order of Friendship, Medal of Honor Euro for his great personal contribution to strengthening international security, peace and stability in the Caucasus, the development of friendly relations between the Republic of South Ossetia and the Russian Federation, Order of St. Mashtots a Euro for outstanding contribution to the consolidation and development of age-old Armenian-Russian friendly relations, Gold Medal of the Yerevan State University, Honorary Medal for participation in the programs of the United Nations. References. External links, biographical information on Lavrov on the Department of Foreign Affairs site, Russian, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Russian, Moscow State Institute of International Relations, appearances on C-SPAN. French, Sergey Lavrov interview.